Hi! Welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I sat down to film and I've really missed it. I actually just got back from a trip to Denver that I got lots of great footage at, and I sat down to edit it and realized that I left my SD card in Denver. Luckily, it's with a good friend who's gonna mail it so I can get all the footage, but honestly, I was stoked to edit that vlog. It was such a great week. I had a wedding and I hung out with my friends from childhood and college, and now I'm back home and I am now a mother. I adopted a sweet baby angel who I don't want to, oh, there she is, hi. Big stretch for the camera. She will show her face eventually and I'll be sure to include some shots, but we're gonna let her rest while I film a Q&A. So I posted on Instagram and TikTok asking for everyone to submit their questions that could be about anything. It can be about science, my job, NASA, PhD, grad school life. It can be about my personal life, living in LA, anything, my past, my future, you name it. And I got some really good questions, so I'm excited to sit here and answer them. I thought about breaking this up into categories, but I think the biggest takeaway that I want people to have is that my life is very blended in a lot of different ways between very different things, like science versus lifestyle versus fashion. And rather than try to split those up, I think it makes more sense to just give it to you all as it comes, because that's how I feel like I'm living every day. I feel like I'm living a double life and I don't have the ability to separate these things in my own life. And I think the goal is to try to find a way for it to all come together. So we're gonna answer all of the questions in whatever random order. We're gonna jump right into it. We do not need a long intro today. Let's get down to business. First question, which is more competitive, academia/research or social media? So this is a really good question because there's actually a lot of really unexpected parallels between trying to make it on social media and trying to make it in science. I ultimately think that science is much more competitive because there is a limited number of spots. There is a limited number of jobs, budgets, control, the number of positions that scientists are able to apply for and work in, whereas on social media it's technically open ball game to anyone at all times, and one person getting famous does not necessarily take away the chance for another person to. So I do believe science is more competitive. What did you study and how did you get to where you are? In undergrad, I majored in biology and I minored in chemistry, so I do have a bachelor's degree in biology. It's a lot different of a path than people normally take to get into astronomy and astrophysics, so now I'm studying planetary science as my PhD, and I have a lot more information about this journey on my TikTok, and I've talked about it a bit before. I have an internship at NASA Ames lined up, but housing is so expensive. Any advice? If you do have an internship lined up somewhere, there should be a coordinator for you at the center that you're working at that can help you with frequently asked questions about housing and stuff when you start an internship. I would also talk to your advisor at NASA, the person you're working with, and ultimately ask other interns that are there. Talk to the people that work where you are, find out how they did it. That's going to be the most accurate way for me to give you housing advice because it's just so different depending on where you live. I see a lot of artist interpretations of things in space. Where can I find the real photo? 9 times out of 10, especially when we're talking about exoplanets, that's going to be basically 10 times out of 10. When we're showing photos of planets, it's often an artist depiction, and that is simply because we don't have the technology to take high-res photos of these objects in space. Space is so big, they are so far away. This is the type of technology that I want to work on for my future career. I want to design telescopes that can do direct imaging of exoplanets, so it's something that is talked about for the future, but it just isn't possible right now, and that's why we don't have any of these images. But that's not true for the solar system. We do get really awesome high-res photos of objects in the solar system, so it doesn't hurt to look at photos of Saturn until we can see some other planets. Have you ever felt discriminated for being a woman in the space field? I have been lucky to never feel discriminated against at my job. I've never felt discriminated against when I was working at NASA. I do, however, feel extremely discriminated against as a woman in science on the internet, especially on TikTok. I have talked about this before, but I started posting in 2021 and I took a long break, and then coming back in 2023, it's like the internet got 10 times meaner. I think people just got more comfortable, or more children started using TikTok, and that is a huge reason why I'm so hesitant to post on there, because the hate is so real. I see creators quitting TikTok a lot because of the hate, and I just fully get it. It's one thing to get a lot of hate if you're a female creator in general, but if you're just like a lifestyle creator or like do fashion, I'm sorry, but you're just not gonna get as much hate as a woman trying to do science on the internet. Yeah, it just doesn't compare. So it's really hard to understand unless you go through it yourself. But yeah, I don't get discriminated against at work, but I do on the internet, and it sucks. What's your favorite exoplanet and why? I always say TRAPPIST-1e because the TRAPPIST system is really famous, and it was the first planet that I ever wrote my first publication on. So I'll just go with TRAPPIST-1e. I have a video pinned to my TikTok about it. If you haven't seen it, it was like the most viral video I ever did. We think it could be similar to Earth in the sense that it receives the same amount of energy from the sun, like the distance is very similar. Oh, the sleepy girl's awake! Oh my god, no, because my cat voice is actually so embarrassing. Oh, well, there she goes again. Anyways, TRAPPIST-1e, I don't actually think it's similar to Earth, but like it's interesting to think about planets that could be, and it's definitely a good example of one that we can use to think about that stuff. What do you do for a living and what's your height? I'm a 5'7" planetary scientist who studies exoplanet climates, specifically terrestrial exoplanets that we think could be similar to Earth. Was there a specific moment that inspired you to work in astronomy? I wouldn't say that there's one specific moment. It's really a culmination of a ton of events that happened throughout my entire life. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid, and now also as an adult, and I was very isolated, and I honestly turned to PBS documentaries and television, and that was where I first learned about outer space. I think I've always kind of been a nerd because I grew up reading a lot and writing a lot and doing a lot of activities. I was an only child too, so I just feel like growing up alone kind of set me up on a path to think deeply about these things. I'm happy I am where I'm at now, but I think I also had a weird childhood. Would you visit another planet if you could? I can't tell you how quickly I would go. My ultimate dream is to go to space. I don't talk about it often because I feel like it's a pipe dream, but then I feel like also I'm doing myself a disservice by not talking about my dreams and not even like putting things into existence. So that's something that I want to start getting better at, is talking about the fact that I really want to go to space. But I would go anywhere they sent me, genuinely. Favorite topic in science outside of your field? Neuroscience. I have always said this. I think that that's what I probably would have studied if I didn't do what I'm doing now. I think that the brain is really fascinating, and I honestly just took a really cool neurobiology class when I was in college that I just thought was really awesome. I think that neuroscience is fascinating. Speaking of TRAPPIST-1e, someone asked, how long would it take to send a probe there with today's technology? Hundreds of thousands of years. So it would take us about 100,000 years to get to the closest the closest exoplanet to us, the closest star system, so the Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri. That's the closest one. TRAPPIST is not the closest, but in terms of other systems, it's not that far. Trying to get to an exoplanet. Ultimately, I would love for my job to have to do with an object that we can get to, and right now I don't see that happening. I don't know. I'm sticking it out for now. If you could be an astronaut, would you change your mind if it was a mission to Mars? I would absolutely be an astronaut. I would not change my mind if it was a mission to Mars. Even though I don't like Mars, I would still go. Loaded question, but what are your plans after your PhD? We've got about 11 months, 10 months left, and I have no idea. Not a clue. Not a clue in the world. I'll be applying for a few postdocs, but I'd love to see what my science communication career can turn into. I am so sick and tired of working and being a student. Honestly, it's so hard to focus on anything other than finishing that I just don't know. So, don't have plans. Ask me again in like 9 months and I will probably still have the same answer. What inspires you the most? Spite. This is not about anything other than basically spite at this point. I'm coming up on year 5 and it's been my 20s basically. These years have been unforgiving and the world has changed so much. When I applied to grad school, the pandemic had not happened and the whole world has changed. I do not think that I ever would have gone to grad school after, like, post 2020. It's just really tough out here. So at this point, it's spite. What's your favorite paper that you've helped written? I feel like when you publish a paper, what you don't see is basically the trauma bond that occurs between the authors of the paper based on how bad the review process went. I was a co-author on a Nature paper about a new absorption line for oxygen that's caused by collisional absorption. It was so cool to get a paper in Nature Astronomy, but the review process was such a nightmare that when I look at that paper, it's like all I can think about. But like, it was worth it. I don't know. I enjoyed that paper. I enjoyed the people. A lot of enjoying the papers that you write has nothing to do with what you're writing about. Like, you could be writing about the coolest planet ever, but it's all about the other people that are working on this paper with you, like your co-authors. And if you have cool co-authors, you could write a paper about anything and it'd be more enjoyable than if not. Very different topic here, but let's go for it. Looks or personality in a man? I don't think that you can like weigh those two things, and I don't think that it's just two things. I think that there's so much more to consider here. Ultimately, if you had to choose one, I do believe personality is more important than looks. However, I do think it's very important to be attracted to your partner, and there's been times where I've attempted to date people that I'm not attracted to just because their personality is awesome, and it never works out well. Always ends in that person ending up very hurt, and that is not ideal. But I pay a lot more attention to other things, mainly like, do you lower my cortisol levels or not? And that is more important to me. Do you believe in aliens? I do believe in living creatures that are not on Earth. I don't believe that aliens are on Earth. I believe that they are living elsewhere. Again, when I talk about, you know, okay, it takes 100,000 years to get to the next exoplanet. So if some other being is able to accomplish this task, I don't see why an alien would show up and just like hang out and hide. I think that if aliens were able to get to Earth, we would know because we would all be donezo in an instant. That's just my opinion though. Where are you ironically from? I feel like I saw Poland somewhere, not sure. I'm from Ukraine. I do have a Polish granddad, I think, but I was born in Ukraine. My entire family, aside from my mom and my grandmother, live in Ukraine. My entire blood family. I have not been back there since I left when I was a kid. Why did you choose to focus on extrasolar targets, not astrobiology of moons in our solar system? It actually wasn't really a deliberate choice. It was really just a circumstantial situation. The lab that I got hired into at Goddard, everyone worked on exoplanets, and that's what I ended up working on. I didn't feel super strongly about it one way or another when I got my job at NASA, and at the time, I mean, I think that exoplanets are just super cool. I just ended up in a lab of exoplanet scientists, and I'm honestly really glad I did. I think it's awesome, but it's nothing against the, you know, astrobiology that you can do in our solar system. I think that's really, really awesome science too. Have you ever had any aesthetic enhancements done? I have had lip filler and Botox. That is it. I would love to sit here and say that I've done more things that I would love to do, but honestly, on a grad student salary, it's not happening. So yeah. I get a little bit of lip filler and a little bit of Botox because grad school has taken years off my life, not only mentally, but also physically. I genuinely feel like, you know, those photos of like the president when he starts and then after he's finished, I feel like that's me. Are you an influencer? Like, do you get free clothes sent to you? How do I do that too? I'm not sponsored by anyone. Anytime I show PR, it's just because I receive PR and I think it's the coolest thing in the world. But anytime anyone ever asks me about doing well on social media or like how do you get attention of brands, how do you get things sent to you, you have to post, okay? You have to start posting. You just have to post. Most people live in this mentality of wanting to get a bunch of things right before they start posting. You have to post. A brand is not going to send PR to someone that doesn't post. That is the number one thing that they are looking for. Once you start posting, then you can start thinking about your engagement and your ability to captivate your audience, but ultimately you have to start just throwing things out there and like seeing what happens, because you would be so surprised. I think a lot of people start TikTok with the intention of doing something specific and then they post some random video and then that ends up doing way better than the things that they were intending to do. You just have to post, okay? It's all trial and error. Would you go back to work at NASA after a PhD if the opportunity arose? Potentially, yes. This is a tough one, because the NASA center that I used to work at, of course, is in Greenbelt, Maryland. I live in LA. I don't see myself leaving LA. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Favorite planet in our solar system? Obviously Saturn. If you've never looked through a telescope and seen Saturn, please make it a priority. It's so cool. The rings are awesome. And technically the other outer planets have rings too. Saturn's are by far the most prominent and visible, and that planet's awesome. Is machine learning or AI used in your field to analyze data? Yes. Super highly sought after skill set. We use AI to discover exoplanets. You could definitely do something with it at NASA. Most underrated city you've been to and what makes it underrated / what made you love it? I feel like I don't think any cities are underrated. Like, they're all cities, you know? Honestly, a place that I'd never expected to love as much as I do love is San Francisco. I know that's controversial and it's really gotten out of hand in the last few years, but it is a beautiful place and I think that people need to be nicer to it. What are you excited about in your space work currently? I'm really excited about the fact that the Habitable Worlds Observatory, which is the next observatory that we're going to launch into space, I'm so stoked that we're finally making progress on that, building the team of scientists, setting the goals, and finally getting the money from Congress to do it. That is something that I want to work on long term, and I think it's just the most exciting thing that our future is going to have for us. So I would definitely say the Habitable Worlds Observatory. What movie do you think depicts space the best? I don't think any blockbuster movie is going to depict space well, because if it did, it would be very boring, because it's a lot of empty space and it takes a lot of time to get to where you're going. So instead, I will tell you my favorite space movie, and it's one that a lot of people haven't seen, but if you haven't watched Contact, you have to watch Contact. In my opinion, I think that Interstellar was inspired from Contact. Matthew McConaughey is also in Contact, and so many people don't know that, but it's got Jodie Foster. It's such a good movie. Contact is a great movie. It doesn't answer your question, but I think that if you want any movie to depict space the best, it's gonna have to be like a documentary style, not like a Hollywood film. Is there any jobs at NASA an amateur could do? I thought of photography or social media for NASA, but I don't know. I'm obsessed with space, but horrible at math. I would say that you can't be an amateur in photography or social media. You'd have to be good at photography or good at social media to work at NASA, but If you're just saying like you really like space but you can't be a scientist or engineer, yes, there are tons of other jobs at NASA. We have so many people that are involved with how science gets explained to the public. Science communication is super important. I think that that's a really great route to go. I think science communication is an awesome alternative if you don't want to do science, because you just get to stay up to date on all of the coolest stuff, and you get to create content that is used to share those things with the public. Of course, yes, we do have social media, we have photographers, we have videographers, we have people that work on branding for the agencies. There's lots of stuff like that. Every job at NASA is going to be available on USA Jobs because you would be a federal employee. I would just honestly peruse, take a look, see what's out there. And yeah, I'm probably not the best to answer this because I am a scientist, but I do know that there are plenty of people that work at NASA that are not scientists or engineers, and we're not trained into that. Advice on how to get into REUs/internships/fellowships with a not so high GPA. I would say that you need to use whatever opportunity you're given to explain why your GPA is not high and use that to your advantage. If you are able to contact the person that you are applying for an internship with outside of the application process to have a conversation with them and discuss it, that would be perfect. Being able to reach out to them over email, having a quick chat, letting them know, hey, I submitted this application and I did include some of this in my application, but I also want to explain to you directly that I have a poor GPA. And a lot of it's so funny. It's not funny. It's kind of sad to watch people immediately dismiss themselves. So I always will say, write your reasoning as to why your GPA is low. And people will say, I don't have a good reason. Like I slacked off. And I'm like, okay, well, let's sit down and talk about your college journey. Many of you had to deal with 2020. That's a whole thing right there. Okay, mental health. So many people I talk to, well, I worked full-time in college. That is a huge reason why you wouldn't have a great GPA. That's why I didn't have a great GPA. Or I hear, I had to take care of kids, or I have siblings that I had to take care of, or I had to take care of my family, or my parent died in this quarter or this semester, or like so many people neglect their own hardships in life. They almost don't even realize when they're sitting down. Like I see so many people be like, oh, I didn't do well because I'm not smart. And it's like, no, you were going through a lot and you don't even remember what you were going through, and I'm having to remind you. So give yourself grace and understand that GPA is not everything. I do believe that at least the people that I work with at NASA are very understanding of that. That's not what they're looking for in these internship or REU applications. Yes, it does matter, but not nearly as much as your research experience and your ability to prove that you are going to be a competent worker. I think that's much more important. Where is home for you? I would say Los Angeles. I don't feel like I'm at home anywhere else. My parents don't live here though, but that's not what makes a place home to me. Very last question. Is it hard to have a relationship or date during grad school? My answer is different from most people's. If you asked anyone in my grad school department, they would say no. I don't know what the actual number is, but it feels like 80% or more of the graduate students that I encounter in my field are either married or in very long-term serious relationships. Most of those relationships started prior to grad school starting. What I see in my cohort is that a lot of people have had their partner's support since day one. I think for me, coming into grad school without that and then trying to date people in real life, it feels impossible. Less than 1% of people in the country have a PhD. And it's not the PhD part that makes me feel like I can't relate to people, it's the being in grad school part. I just feel like the amount of stress that I endure on a daily basis and the way that I just feel about myself for a whole 5 years is really hard for people to understand that don't go to grad school or don't have a family member that they grew up with that went to grad school or something like that. So it's made dating fully impossible for me. I decided to stop dating earlier this year. I realized that as I was entering the fifth and final year of my grad school program, there's no way that I'm going to meet someone that shows up for my most stressful year yet and it's just the best relationship ever. I really can't expect anyone to show up at this point in my life and accept me for the baggage that I have as a final year PhD student. I've decided not to expect that from anyone, and I've just realized that with everything else I'm trying to do right now, not knowing where I'm going to work in a year, not knowing where I'm going to live, not knowing what path I take, there's just no good reason for me to drag someone into that at this point. So I think it's extremely difficult to date as a grad student, but I know that my colleagues very heavily rely on their partners to get them through, and I'm very glad that they have it. And if you are a grad student that has someone, don't take it for granted, because trying to get people to, you can't expect anyone to understand how you feel as a PhD student if they've not done it themselves. Like, there's nothing that you can do or say that will be able to make sense of how you feel during this time. I can't stress that enough. Hopefully this Q&A clears some things up, make some more sense of things. I'm always happy to answer more questions. Definitely down to do this again soon. In the meantime, I'm thinking the next video will be my Denver vlog, and more of a vlog style rather than a sit down, because I think I'm gonna try to kind of alternate here. I've missed you guys. Thank you so much for watching this, and thank you for sending the questions if you did. I got tons. Honestly, I actually didn't even get to go through all of them, so we'll have to do this again soon. But before we go, we're gonna say bye to my baby, Mila. This is Mila. Mila. So this is my sweet baby angel. We think she's about 3 years old. Her first vet appointment is August 7th. And she's very sleepy right now because she had the zoomies at 4 a.m. and then again at 11 a.m. But she is such a good girl. Hi. Good girl. Okay. Say I love you. Are you licking my head? Bye.